So, the latest book I finished is The Legend of Podkin One-Ear by Kieran Larwood. This is a book I'm rather late on. It's been out a couple of years and I know there's been 2 sequels since. I was recommended to read this book by a whole host of people, both in person and through the internet, particularly Twitter. And I must admit, their suggestions certainly were warranted. This book was awesome. Now, the book, as you can probably guess from the cover, focuses around a rabbit. A rabbit who, we discover, only has one ear. Now, the cover itself of this book is quite unique, quite striking, and certainly took my eye the minute I got it. As a book itself, it's a lovely book to hold, very aesthetically pleasing, and obviously really nice from the outside. Now, the interior illustrations themselves by David Watts, and we'll come to those later, give the book a whole new dimension itself. Now, a quick run through of the plot. The plot centres around the key character, Podkin One-Ear. Podkin is a young rabbit. He lives in a warren that is run by his father. His father is chieftain, who is essentially in charge of that warren. We're living in a world where there are several warrens dotted around. I believe there's 12 warrens. And each of these is its own sort of rabbit kingdom, if you like. Each is special in its own way, and there's a sort of hierarchical order within that warren, and the oldest son of each chieftain becomes leader of the warren when the chieftain has gone. Now, we're also in a world that there are some quite nasty characters. The Gorms have essentially been created, which is a breed of rabbits that has been heavily influenced by some weird iron metallic type structures which are turning them bad, and they're also turning some other strains of animals bad, notably crows. Now, all starts well for Podkin in this story. All starts well. He's quite a lazy rabbit. He's living in his warren. His father is very keen to build him up and get him sort of trained and ready to lead when his time comes. However, the Gorms arrive. They kill Podkin's father. We don't find out till much later in the book what happens to Podkin's mother, but Podkin, his sister, and his little brother, they flee the warren and they look for safety. Now, the story follows those 3 characters through the woods. They're on a journey for survival. They're trying to find, first of all, some safety and salvation. But later, as the book goes on, they're trying to find somewhere to call home. They meet some lovely characters along the way. They meet a rabbit who is blind, who is essentially a sort of gun for hire, a rabbit who's paid not very much to fight on behalf of other rabbits. And initially Podkin requires this rabbit's services, but as the story goes on, we find a link between this rabbit and Podkin's father, and there's some really lovely intertwining there. Now, the way this story is told is very interesting. It's almost a book within a book. We have a travelling rabbit who goes to different warrens and tells the great stories of Podkin One-Ear to young rabbits. So within the book itself, we have the whole setting of this story of Podkin being told and conveyed as a sort of legend to a whole host of young rabbits who are totally in awe of Podkin. I don't want to ruin the plot further. I don't want to go too deep into what happens, because what I will say and what I've mentioned on Twitter is it's a lovely pace, this story. It develops beautifully, the plot. It doesn't rush through the events. We are very much with Podkin on this journey, but it's never boring. It had me gripped all the way. I enjoyed it hugely. And reading it, knowing that there were other books to come in this series, made me enjoy it all the more, because I could savour the pages thinking, let's really get to know how this character feels. Let's get to know where he's going with this story. Let's really get to know Podkin and see how this young, vulnerable rabbit might evolve into what we hope is one day a great leader. Now, looking at themes and messages from this book, and that was something that was on my mind throughout, there were some lovely sort of lessons that could perhaps be taken into the classroom. There was obviously the PSHE element when we're talking about loss. Podkin lost his father, he was separated from his mother. There was the situation where siblings had to club together and really be united with Podkin, is it Pez and Puck, his younger brother and sister. We had the situation where the sister was almost acting as a young carer for little Puck, the little rabbit there. We had the sort of diversity of or sort of physical disability and diversity of the blind character, but we saw how he was able to adjust and live a pretty normal life and almost heighten his additional senses to his advantage, which was lovely to see. We saw different groups, typically people who didn't come from the same place and didn't live together. We saw how they could unite and become one and become stronger for that, which was really lovely to see. Lots of additional messages, lots of really nice themes, but altogether a wonderful story, and one that I think would sit beautifully in a Year 4 classroom. I think as a class read, Year 3s could get plenty from it. There'd be some explaining to do, some vocabulary explaining, but it wouldn't hurt. But a book that I think Year 4 upwards was thoroughly enjoy. So really enjoyed that, The Legend of Podkin One-Ear. Just before I go, I've put a few post-it notes in just to show you some of the absolutely stunning interior illustrations from the illustrator David Watt. I'll give you a last one here. This one particularly caught my eye. Stunning. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you've liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and it'd be even better if you hit subscribe. Have a good weekend.